Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans. Like us, I'd love to see who's watching. The verdict came in silence on the central dais of Triad Hall. Three Eladari judges hovered above a glowing platform, their robes pulsing with faint blue light. No applause, no motion, just the weight of a billion unseen eyes, as the sentence echoed across the stars. Above them, a screen zoomed out from a slow rotating Earth, expanding past the moon, then Mars, until the Sol system hung exposed. Cold, labeled Forgotten Chancellor Varel raised one limb, the chamber stilling at his signal, his voice cut clean through the silence in the matter of the Sol designation colloquially known as Earth. This high tribunal, with full authority granted by the Alliance, Eladari finds the human species categorically unstable, culturally regressive, and a threat to the galactic standard of peace. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The camera feed widened, revealing spectators from dozens of worlds. Some nodded in smug approval, others more neutral, whispered in unfamiliar tongues, but none protested. Varel continued, his voice flat as a blade. As of this day cycle, humanity is to be placed under transitional management. All military assets will be decommissioned. Orbital control will be transferred to coalition oversight. Cultural recalibration will begin within the standard rotation. In the lower tiers of the chamber, a group of Altari burst into laughter with eyes like liquid chrome and torsos woven from strands of bone and silk. They nudged one another, whispering jokes in their native screech behind them. A silver diplomat, a slender eel-skinned creature with a crown of bone, grinned broadly and leaned into his translator mic. They still burn fuel in atmosphere vessels. Their last war was fought with metals and combustion. This isn't suppression, it's a mercy kill. Laughter followed. Delegate, whose armor-like skin clattered as he chuckled, added, "Let them keep their sticks, maybe we'll display one in a museum." The feed cut momentarily, then resumed all across the galaxy, in military outposts, orbital stations, civilian hubs, and trade platforms. The same image was transmitted, a wide shot of the tribunal hall, then the declaration rendered in each species' script. But on Earth, the silence was different. General Archer stood alone in the central command gallery beneath New Geneva, the underground strategic hub carved deep into the Eurasian plate. The light above him flickered from the transmission screen as Chancellor Verrill's words finished their loop around Archer. Young officers remained seated in stunned silence. No one moved. Major Keller, lean and sharp-eyed, exhaled through his nose and muttered, "They're serious, they actually think we're done." Across Earth's networks, the tribunal transmission was still being replayed. Children in shelters clutched blankets as alien judges proclaimed their future. Elderly veterans watched from care centers, eyes attentive in orbital stations above Saturn. Civilian miners stared at one another in disbelief in a lecture hall on Luna Colony Thor. A history professor paused mid-sentence, slowly sat down and just stared at the screen, but inside the war room, Archer didn't blink. He watched Varel deliver the verdict one last time. Then he nodded once to Lieutenant Carson. "Play it," he said seconds later. Every channel, civilian, military, galactic, was hijacked. The screen flickered. There was no sound. It began with ancient footage digitally restored, declassified in the last week. A black and white image of a human squad infiltrating a snowy outpost, silent and lethal. Then a flash-forward orbital fire lancing down from an ancient satellite platform, vaporizing a cruiser in one burst. Then a low-altitude desert blitz tracked vehicles kicking up dust as soldiers in adaptive armor sprinted beside drone swarms, breaching an enemy fortress in 30 seconds. Flat, another cut, a camera drone flying over the ruins of the siege of Europa, scorched ice-broken sky bridges, and a single soldier dragging his injured captain out of a collapsing corridor before the entire structure detonated behind him. Next, thermal footage from the Arctic conflict's bodies moving through sub-zero storms, forming flanking formations, executing synchronized ambushes against armored walkers twice their size, still no sound. Then came the shot Archer, standing in uniform. Older, weathered reel, no filters. His medals were dull, his collar loose, the fabric worn from decades of command. He didn't posture. He stared into the lens with the cold precision of a man who had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Calm measured a ghost. The galaxy thought buried, now staring back. You should have checked our archives. The screen went black. 10 seconds passed, then chaos in the galactic opinion stream, a live feed of comments, votes, and reactions viewed by billions. The channel detonated into a storm of disbelief. Is this a joke? Wrote a Kasari diplomat. These are fabricated records that war footage is centuries old, said an analyst from the Core Broadcast Guild. Why is there a human on screen? Aren't they extinct? For some species, it wasn't rhetorical. Entire generations had grown up believing humans were little more than exaggerated cautionary tales, myths used to justify military budgets or to warn against unchecked ambition in academic archives across the mid-rim. Earth's coordinates were marked as culturally irrelevant in some sectors. Even the name Terra had been replaced by numeric tags, scrubbed from common language by centuries of political manipulation. They can't even breach. Warp, can they? But then silence took over again. The kind of silence that spreads not from confusion, but from creeping dread among the Varnari, a race of insectoid archivists famed for their emotionless logic. One representative simply ended their public feed without a word. The Ural Confederacy, a species of crystalline tacticians, issued a request for classified access to the full Earth military register, only to find every link locked or scrambled. They tried a second route, querying wartime archives of proxy conflicts in unaligned systems. Everything returned null. Their analysts flagged a single conclusion: deliberate obfuscation. The humans hadn't just been forgotten. They had erased their trail in orbit around Kepler 92. An Avenor commander watched the video 3 times before whispering to his adjutant, "I served in the Eladari War of 842, and those tactics, they weren't simulations, that was muscle memory." In the Triad Hall, Chancellor Verrill's expression remained unchanged, but his photophores dimmed for half a breath. A visible nervous response to those who knew how to read it inside the Earth Command Gallery. The room erupted in quiet movement. Officers passed orders, relayed messages, no one shouting, no one laughing, just action, as if the verdict had been expected, as if the response had been rehearsed in a lower-level shelter. A teacher turned to her class and said nothing, just raised one finger to her lips, asking for stillness. The children obeyed without question. Some sat up straighter. One clenched his toy tighter, as if suddenly understanding what it meant to be from Earth. On Luna Base, a retired lieutenant clapped his hands once and limped toward the armory. In the Martian colonies, workers began sealing the tram lines with practiced motions. Not rushed, not frantic, programmed. General Archer remained in place for another few seconds. Then he spoke again, this time only to his staff. "They think they just kicked down a door," he said. "Let's show them what was waiting behind it." The corridors beneath New Geneva still hummed with the broadcast's echo as the past began to surface, quiet, steady, unavoidable 830 years earlier, deep within the administrative core of the Alliance Elodari. A quiet motion had passed, with little fanfare. The Rathari delegation, sleek and serpentine in appearance with glassy black dermis and rows of bioluminescent tendrils coiled along their backs, submitted a classified proposal to the Security Consortium, a psychological concern regarding the species designated as Soul Origin Type 3 humans, redundant, obsolete, emotionally volatile. The Rathari diplomat had said his name was Sorak, and unlike his peers, he never raised his voice or sought praise. Their archives reflect primitive dominance behavior and a proclivity for rapid aggression. We must ensure their capabilities are contextualized appropriately. No one objected. The Silver wanted distraction from internal uprisings. The Iltari craved new voting leverage. The Eladari simply feared unrest. And so it began, the systematic reduction of human history. Centuries of war logs were relabeled as myth. Tactical archives were deemed simulation studies. The deepest files were reclassified under restricted mythologies. Inquiry access required 10 layers of clearance, and none were ever granted. Entire military campaigns, from the orbital collapse over Phobos to the siege of Arcturus, were edited down to footnotes. Even the name Terran Command was replaced by generic designations like Localized Defense Cell 2274 by the 3rd century. Earth's own allies referred to them in past tense. The eraser wasn't just permitted, it was encouraged. What couldn't be erased was buried. What couldn't be buried was mocked. The Rathari's next step was quiet surgical. They recruited the Zenadal shapeshifters, nomads. Without a homeworld, the Zenadal had survived for millennia by selling their services to the highest bidder. Their default form resembled something insectoid and amphibious: elongated skulls, four black reflective eyes, and translucent skin that shimmered faintly when at rest. But they rarely remained in their natural state for long. They were spies by culture, observers by biology. In the sole assignment, 50 were deployed. Their mission was simple blend. Observe report, Errol was one of them. He arrived on Earth during the Reconstruction era, assuming the role of a data analyst embedded in the East African
Technical union. Others filtered into academic councils, shipping unions, marriage registries, spaceport directories. They became musicians, welders, professors. One became a bartender in the Martian frontier city of Kaladesh for 36 years. None of them ever broke cover until some of them did. The fracture began quietly. Errol had bonded with a human linguist named Daniel Croft, an Air Force veteran turned cultural ambassador. They argued constantly, laughed, spent holidays together. When Croft was diagnosed with degenerative neural decay, Errol sat by his bed for 5 days. Croft died clutching Errol's hand, whispering, "Thanks to a man who never existed." Errol remained motionless, and something deep, ancient, unnameable broke. Another Zenadel named Shun, embedded as a propulsion engineer in Tau Ridge, filed his 6th report late, then he skipped it entirely. Yarus, posing as a technician aboard the Titan relay station, disabled her own transmitter and left the unit archived. She never explained why. During a private meeting in a subterranean safe house in Jakarta, 5 Zenidal gathered around a low table. None wore disguise. "You're getting too close," hissed Terrell, one of the purists. "We were not sent to empathize. We are observers." Errol's gaze did not shift. "No, you were sent to follow orders. I was sent to understand, and I did." Tial's limbs flexed uneasily, posture defensive. "You're falling for them. I'm recognizing them." Errol replied something you refused to do. The room fell silent. What followed was a cascade of silent decisions, not coordinated, not ordered, just chosen. 12 Zenodal cut their feeds entirely. 5 married, 9 had children, who would later carry genetic blends that no one had ever documented. Some disappeared, others, for the first time, walked openly into Terran military outposts and removed their disguises. At one such meeting deep in the Andes forward base, General Kerr Brenner, a stocky, silver-bearded veteran of the last Orion incursion, stood face to face with Errol, now in his true form. The chamber fell quiet as the alien hesitated. Brenner didn't move. He simply extended his hand. "Either you're already one of us," he said, "or you haven't understood what it means to be human." Errol looked at the hand. No weapon, no data chip, just trust. Then he took it and didn't let go. Days later, the first data transfer took place, a hybrid camouflage system built using biomimetic sequencing layered over quantum disruption fields. Not just invisibility, total refractive disappearance. It was a gift and a warning. Soon Errol and 2 other Zenadel stood before General Archer and his inner command. The briefing was short. "They'll come," said Errol, "but not alone. Rathari influence has grown in the Alliance. They'll rally others to strike with them." General Archer leaned back in his chair, eyes dark. "What will they believe about us?" Errol replied without blinking, "that you are fractured, unevolved." Desperate, Archer gave a brief nod. "That'll work." The humans laid out their strategy. The Zenadel would deliver their final report to the Alliance, but stripped of all Postalliance cooperation, without revealing the hybrid tech or the active battle doctrine humanity had refined over centuries. The false report was prepared in the upper tiers of the Alliance command. The reaction was immediate. Arthurian voice. Sorek seized on it, standing before the Grand Council and slamming his tendrils against the data scroll. "They are accelerating development in secret. This is a breach of treaty, a threat to interstellar equilibrium. I call for forceful resolution. The Sulvar seconded. The Altari follows, even the passive. Hazericast nodded in agreement, anxious to avoid being labeled weak. Within a week, authorization was granted. 3 fleets were summoned, each from a different quadrant, each composed of species known not for their intelligence but their aggression. The Voga, whose exoskeletal dreadnoughts never negotiated, the Kolul, whose methane breathers fired on civilian frequencies without distinction, and the Skriari, a fanatical species that regarded human physiology as an affront to natural order. From the command balcony of Earth's eastern orbital array, General Archer watched as transmission logs spiked. The war was coming. In the shadows beside him, Errol remained silent. "They think they're coming to crush us," Archer said, not turning his head, "but they're walking into the center of something they never learned to understand." Errol finally spoke, his voice low. "They think they're coming to destroy you." He looked up at the night sky, the black canvas between the stars. "They're not invading," he said. "They're arriving right on time." The first fleet crossed Neptune's orbit at full combat, spread engines flaring like comets behind rows of exoskeletal dreadnoughts. The Voga led the vanguard, towering vessels forged from organic alloys, bristling with articulated weapon limbs, and flanked by clouds of smaller parasite craft. Their flagship, Kutoran's spear, moved with the momentum of a falling continent. Its commander, a grotesque mass of plated muscle, named Rojatan, broadcasting a single word on open channel submission. There was no response. The second fleet entered moments later from a separate vector further in system. Cull swarm carriers pulsed with methane jets, their hulls segmented and scale-coated, each vessel designed for atmospheric breach and planetary shock drops. Scryri interdictors moved like daggers between them, sleek obsidian crafts with no visible propulsion and no visible crew, as if grown rather than built. Still no response. What the alien commanders expected was resistance, retaliation. What they found was nothing. No defensive satellites spun into firing position. No alert beacons flared from planetary rings. No fighters emerged from the asteroid belt. The system was open, broadcast frequencies, idle proximity sensors, active but unshielded. It was as if the humans had forgotten how to defend themselves. Rojatan chittered in disbelief. "We are not even challenged," he spat. "Their orbital grid is dark. We strike now, burn their moons and their home world before they stir." The order was given. The fleets advanced. They passed Mars, and then the system blinked just once, a flicker across long-range telemetry, a fractional delay in magnetic echo fields. Most captains dismissed it. Those who didn't were already dead. The first Vogar cruiser disintegrated without warning, one moment intact the next. A collapsing blossom of pressure and ion fire. The detonation tore 2 interceptors in half and shredded a command frigate's forward array. Seconds later, 4 more vanished in tandem. No projectiles, no launch origin, just erasure. Kulsul commanders panicked, calling for spectrum sweeps and pulse triangulations. The signals reached no target because there was nothing to detect. No engines, no energy trails, just results. Above Saturn towers buried in the methane, cloud canopy began to awaken. Towering barrels of silent plasma accelerators, long dismissed as weather stations, unfolded like blooming flowers. They fired in sequence, horizontal arcs of compressed heat slicing through dozens of vessels in perfect geometries. A Skriari frigo, attempting a retreat vector, disappeared in mid-burn. No debris on board Kuturan's spear. Rojatan bellowed for a full combat retreat, his command voice scrambling over multiple bands. "They're cloaked," he shrieked. "They're invisible." The second fleet tried to scatter. The Skriari flicked into refractive space, attempting microfall jumps, but their exit points collapsed mid-transition, resulting in violent implosions that twisted entire sections of local gravity. The Koliul fell back toward their own carriers. Rallying in formation, they launched kinetic warheads, hoping to saturate local space. A mistake. The asteroid belt responded. Chunks of rock, seemingly inert, detonated. Fields of magnetic shrapnel and counter-impulse mines lit up the space between Mars and Jupiter. decimating half their formation. In under a minute, those that survived fled at full burn aboard the Turvam, the Kulsul war leader Harath Vor, an amphibious hooded creature with pale fan-like ridges along his head, watched his screens dim to red. "This isn't resistance," Rathvor whispered, staring at the ruins of his fleet. "It is an extinction protocol, and we're not the ones running it." And then he shut the command feed down back to the war room. No lights flickered, no voices rose. General Archer stood, with arms crossed, his expression unreadable, watching the engagement report stream across the sidewall. In scrolling, silent text, the air smelled of ozone and stale coffee behind him. Lieutenant Saw used a stylus to cross-check timestamps against movement windows. "They're retreating," Saw said, voice neutral. "They were never advancing," Archer replied. No one asked for confirmation. The trap had been sprung hours ago. Colonel Trent, a wiry man with sunken eyes and a permanent frown, stepped forward. "We're picking up isolated survivors from both fleets, scattered vectors converging to grid point Theta 5. They're limping back to the third." Archer said, "Let them." He didn't smile. He simply turned back to the wall, back in deep space. The remnants of the first and second fleets staggered toward rendezvous coordinates. 17 ships in total out of nearly 300. The rest were vapor wreckage or still spinning silently in gravity traps communications. Dead navigation frozen. Some captains had already triggered self-destruct rather than be scavenged. The survivors reached Theta 5, a cold stretch of empty black near the Kuiper edge. There, they were met by the third fleet. Unlike the others, the Rathari had not advanced. They had not fired a single shot. Their formation remained static, their weapons unfired, their hulls cold and unreadable. Dozens of ships, sinuous and dark-shaped, like coiled predators, drifted in a calm, stable spread. Sorek stood on the commandis of the Enshoreva, his eyes half-lidded tendrils, twitching gently in thought. He observed the approaching survivors, monitored their transmissions, and heard the fear in every clipped report. Precision, no.
Source satellites disguised as debris, invisible systems, remote detonation, entire fleet vanished in silence. He said nothing beside him. The communications officer, a Rathari with smaller frame and pale spine lights, asked, "Do we reposition?" Sorak finally opened his eyes. "No, this was anticipated." The officer hesitated. "The attack, the reaction?" Cirque corrected. "They needed a demonstration. They gave it behind them. One of the Skriari survivors broadcast a request for fleet merger. Another sent a partial data dump of combat losses." Sork nodded. "Once let them think that was it." He turned, stepping down from the DIs, and activated a sealed console inside schematic projections of satellites. Communication buoys and orbital grid systems rotated in quiet motion. Embedded within them were the real tools. Cloaked drones, hollowed data frames, virus clusters. Let them think it's over. He said, "The real war isn't in their skies. It's already inside their systems in the aftermath of the massacre above Jupiter." Silence returned to the system exactly as planned, but the next wave didn't come with guns. The first drone came in cold, drifting with a dead transponder and fragments scorched plating its hull, bore the false scars of a shattered Kulsul corvette, twisted and irradiated as if it had barely survived the slaughter above Jupiter. It tumbled along a natural debris corridor and latched silently onto relay node. K-21, a comat orbiting high above Earth's dark side. 3 seconds later, the node stopped transmitting. No alerts were raised 2 hours after the battle. Dozens more came. They slipped into decaying orbits or hovered in planetary shadows, mimicking wreckage trajectories down to the millisecond. Their cores carried Rathari infiltration logic, encoded viruses, pulse disruptors, layered redundancies, and each of them operated on one principle: remain unnoticed until embedded. When they activated, it was never loud. One decommissioned mining drone near Titan's outer ring blinked red, transmitted a falsified software update to the civilian nav array, and then self-emulated scattering fragments with embedded relay loops that hijacked the nearest defense buoy. Orbital lanes began to shift slowly at first, then unpredictably. Then the lanes vanished back to the war room, lost contact with Sector 6. Lieutenant Saw reported her tone tighter than usual, confirming loss of tether pings from outpost arrays on the Martian side. General Archer didn't move. His eyes were locked on the central display wall, rows of encrypted feeds, now blipping irregularly. Some flickering out, mid-cycle Colonel Trent spoke up. His voice dry. We're seeing partial collapses across relay bands. Stations are still active, but they're not responding to query. We've had to switch to fallback triangulation. Major Eidos, a logistics officer from Europa Command, stepped forward, sir, with the main uplinks down. We're blind across 3 sectors long range. Comms can't penetrate the fallback encryption cycles fast enough. Tactical relays are fragmenting. A tremor of silence rippled through the room. Then came the first hard report. Leonov station's gone dark. Archer turned his head. Repeat that. Leonov. We lost telemetry and heat signature 5 seconds apart on screen. The schematic of Mars updated in real time. A red X pulsed, where Leonov had orbited for over 600 years, once the pride of Earth's first true orbital command. The Leonov had survived the Kuiper mutiny, the Venus blockades, and the solar partition riots. Now it was gone without even a scream. The system didn't even mourn it. Just one more light blinked out. A second later, the feed caught up a frame-by-frame replay, showed the station's power grid flickering, then, with no warning, a pulse of internal heat spiking high and fast fuel separation occurred 3 milliseconds later. No incoming fire, no weapon trace, just failure. Lieutenant Saw looked up. No escape pods launched. Trent's voice dropped. How many on board had swallowed 112, mostly administrative, 9 active duty officers? Nobody spoke in the silence. The pressure changed. Archer stepped forward. His voice was calm. Lockdown remaining command nodes, isolate. Internal navigation systems. I want deadline relays re-enabled and confirmed. Anything not hardwired is now compromised. Sayre responded immediately, inputting commands in rapid sequence. Trent looked to Archer. What if this is just the beginning? Archer didn't answer. He pointed to the tactical grid map. Every relay collapse draw patterns find the source. A technician called out from the rear bank. Sir, ship tow. Ship lanes between Neptune and Saturn are no longer syncing with grid alignments. Units in those lanes are reporting manual corrections, meaning navigation is failing back in orbit. The 4th casualty occurred the nearest dawn. A hospital ship returning from the Saturn front drifted 5 degrees off its corridor alignment and crossed into a low-velocity collision arc with a civilian fuel freighter. The alert system fired too late. Both ships exploded in a silent chain of flashes across the void, scattering flaming debris into the dark. Within minutes, 2 more mid-range destroyers vanished. One crushed by miscalculated gravitational slingshot, another directed into a dead zone echo pocket where signals collapsed entirely. Sector 7 lost visibility. Entirely back to the war room. Colonel Trent snapped to attention. We've lost comms with Hammerfall unit in lunar orbit. Static across all bands, Major. Edra stepped forward, pulling data onto a secondary screen. Secondary defense grids, locking us out, multiple nodes, reporting phantom override commands. We're trying to reassert control, but the firmware is shifting faster than we can patch it. Lieutenant S.A. paused her sequence. Sir, I think this is coordinated, simultaneous collapse of command navigation and fallback layers. It's not fragmentation, it's infiltration. A younger officer in the corner, Lieutenant Park, turned from his station. His face was pale. We are under attack. A cold silence fell this time. Even Archer said nothing for a full beat. Then, with measured calm, he looked at the table. Begin containment. Trent stepped in with what vectors Archer didn't flinch. Local command visual confirmations only. No remote interface, no uplinks. We operate blind if we have to saw. Looked up, sir. We don't even know where it's coming from. I don't need to know where Archer said. I need to know what we still have around him. The war room moved into action slowly, as if under pressure, but steady. The map was redder now and quieter outside the atmosphere in the shadow of Mars. The last video feed from a defense drone caught a single image before vanishing a cloud of debris shaped like a cruiser hull opening like a flower, expelling thousands of micro-units into the orbital layer of Leonov's grave. It transmitted no signature. It didn't need to. Archer stared at the darkening board. His voice, low, pull black, echo protocols from archive. I want all surviving battle groups put on local authority. No dependencies assume all top-level systems are compromised. Sir Ados asked carefully, "Is this the fallback scenario?" Archer didn't look away from the screen. Were there in a far corner, someone whispered, "It's happening again." No one answered, but in that moment, every man in the room remembered stories passed down from earlier wars, the ones not recorded in public archives, the ones told by men who woke up screaming at night and never spoke of why the line was cracking. Humanity was at war again, but not in glory and not with pride. This time they were alone, and the dark was no longer empty while command descended into blind containment and system-wide blackout. Far from the war room on the broken corridors of Phobos, a flicker of resistance stirred the pressure doors slammed shut behind them as the corridor lights dimmed to emergency red Lieutenant Mauro Vasquez ducked beneath a crackling conduit rifle slung tight across his chest. Phobos Station Delta 2 was in freefall, power cycling sporadically, gravity shifting in sick lurches around him, and 4 others from Echoel held formation. 2 Marines, 1 systems engineer, and the 4th, a silent figure with a long cloak hunched from a plasma burn across the shoulder. Errol. The Xenodel agent stumbled, his skin flickering through stress colors. Translucent green to fractured bronze. Vasquez caught his arm. "Keep moving," the lieutenant said. More to the team than to himself, they'd been cut off for 40 hours. No uplink, no tactical feed, no confirmation of survival beyond their own oxygen counters, but the analog relay buried under Phobos's regolith. An ancient magnetic repeater from the early lunar colonization era had pinged twice, faint but alive. So they ran toward it, a shudder passed through the station. Bulkheads groaned, lights blinked, and then came the sound, metal on metal, distant and fast. Drones, seal it behind, shouted, Corporal Dawn spinning to weld a sliding door shut before the torch finished. The first drone breached it, dropped from a maintenance hatch above, shaped like a skeletal arachnid armored in carbon-stripped plating. 6 limbs flexing in a twitch response arc. It locked onto the heat signature and lunged. Vasquez pulled his sidearm and fired twice. The first round bounced off the second hit. The sensor cluster Errol was already moving, despite the burn shifting his limb shape mid-stride, driving. A spike of hardened keton straight into the drone's core. It convulsed and died. Dawn closed the seal. The passage fell silent again. They reached the relay chamber. 12 minutes later, it was dark cold. The chamber had been mothballed for 2 centuries. Dust floated in weightless clumps at the center. A manual coil, 3 copper rings linked to a magnetic pulse engine that hadn't been activated since pre-unification engineer Rajit Patel dropped to his knees beside the console. "We've got residual field in the main coil. If I can route from the thermal layer and trigger a pulse, we can send a short-range analog signal, encrypted analog bandwidth, no risk of digital interception." Vasquez nodded. "Do it." Errol sat beside a wall and exhaled.
Skin flickering to a dull gray blue. "Even if it works," he said, "they may not recognize it, they will." Vasquez replied, "It's old enough." Patel rerouted power. Sparks flew. He slammed a switch with his elbow and twisted the capacitor lock into place. The pulse fired 100 meters above, embedded in a crumbling external array. A forgotten antenna lit green for the first time in generations. The signal jumped not far, but far enough back in orbit. A Rathari drone circling above Phobos received conflicting navigational commands. It paused mid-flight, recalibrated, and exploded its override core. Having been fed, a reversed polarity burst from within the station below. Errol lifted his head. "They're listening." A second later, every drone within 2 kilometers began to shift erratically. Some spiraled, some dove into the rock, some simply shut down. "Sabotage successful," Patel muttered. "We're clear for 7 minutes." "Good." said Vasquez. Let's finish this. They moved through the shattered maintenance shaft leading to control ring. See, half the ring was depressurized, the other half under drone lockdown. They worked in silence, pushing through flickering hallways and melted consoles. 3 drones met them in the corridor. Faster, newer, sleeker they hit. Hard Patel took a glancing blow to the leg, went down. Errol moved forward. Intercepting one mid-charge, the drone lashed out, slicing open Errol's side. Vasquez turned at the sound of impact and saw the Xenodel collapse, one arm crushed beneath him, half his face shimmering with static. From the trauma response, he didn't hesitate. Cover! Vasquez yelled, diving into the kill zone. He dragged Errol behind a pillar, ignoring the burn across his arm where shrapnel had caught him. You're hurt, Errol rasped. You protected us for centuries in secret, Vasquez answered, reloading. Now it's our turn. You're risking your life, the alien said. You already did. Vasquez replied, I'm just returning the favor. The remaining drones closed in, but from the side corridor came twin flashes of blue. Dawn and Patel re-engaged with improvised arc flares, shorting the last 2 drones mid-leap. The hallway went still. Patel limped forward. Ring C's control cluster is 50 meters ahead. They reached it. Manual override took 17 seconds. Ariel barely upright, keyed in a command string from Memory 1 he'd learned a decade ago, but never thought he'd use the sabotage loop reversed in orbit. 5 more drones detonated across the system. Something changed, deep under the sea of tranquility. An obsolete lunar relay came online. Its analog pulse echoed across buried cable lines, relays long thought inactive. A magnetic field array responded near the Venusian outer ring, then another from Europa's crust. The signal propagated, and it wasn't just Phobos anymore. On an atmospheric rig above Saturn, a civilian operator named Chen Liang stood from his console. Eyes wide, a man beside him, a short, balding mechanic with unusually slow breath, tapped the console twice. Liang looked at him. The man's form shimmered, eyes darkened, skin shifted. I'm activating, the Xenard said softly. Protect your reactors. Then he was gone, in 6 other sites across the system, mines, labs, transport hubs. Humans turned to longtime co-workers and saw them change, not as enemies, as allies. Each action restored a heartbeat, not a counterattack, a pulse of order. In each case, no alarm sounded. No one screamed precision timing. Loyalty, and at each control console after the work was done, they left behind the same thing. A sigil burned into the metal, an angular symbol like a fractured eye. The Xenodal had never signed their work before. Now they did not as infiltrators, but as comrades. The tactical board flickered, once, then pulsed. Red zones shifted, some yellowed. One blinked green. Colonel Trent stepped forward. We just re-established contact with Lunar Relay. Net local authority nodes are responding from Phobos and Venus sectors. Major Edo stared at the feed. How we didn't send anything. Archer said nothing at first, then as the board slowly recalibrated, he stepped closer. They were with us the whole time, he said, waiting for this moment. He didn't smile, but for the first time in days, he stepped away from the screen, while the galaxy reeled from flickering lights and rising signals across Phobos and Europa. Nothing moved beyond Neptune's frozen edge. No transmissions, no comms, no life signatures, just the deep void, and a silence that pressed in the true human fleet rested there, cloaked beneath layered thermal baffles and refractive mesh fields aligned in concentric formations, so large they warped local gravitational drift hulls coated in obsidian hex sheath systems running on optical fiber and magnetic trigger relays. They drifted like carved monoliths, dead to every known scan, but alive in every way that mattered. It had no name in public registers, no visible ID beacons, no broadcast relays internally. High Command simply called it Gravemind. Back near Saturn III, Rathari fleet, undaunted and untouched, until now watched the rising signals from recaptured zones with a numb emotion. They had no name for unease aboard the Enshariva. Sorex stood still, tendrils twitching in microscopic pulses as he reviewed a cluster of sensor anomalies displayed in golden red across the main array. The feedback wasn't dramatic, barely measurable distortions, pressure shifts, inconsistencies in distant gravitational harmonics, but they repeated regular, predictable, like breathing. Commander Ulath Ven, a senior Kulul tactician embedded with the fleet, shifted nervously in his ambient tank. His translucent body guild and wide-framed pulsed with stress light down his flanks that pattern again. Ulath Ven croaked 3 cycles. Now this is no random drift. Serac didn't look away from the data, amplify the last echo overlay against known stellar drift models. A technician obeyed on screen, the patterns realigned no longer random. They were spaced, rhythmic. Another Rathari, younger, sharper, leaned closer to the console. That's a staging grid. Sorak finally spoke, or a fleet hiding in one silence followed Ulath, then shifted again. We've seen their ghost ships' automated units, but if they are puppets, then someone's still holding the strings. Sorak finished. He turned toward his operations chief launch probe's full sweep of the outer system search beyond Neptune. Deep vector arcs, the order went out 8 long-range probes deployed from the fleet streaking across space on silent rails. None came back. 3 vanished mid-jump. 2 transmitted static, then ceased. 1 returned a single distorted frame, a shadow far too large to be a ship blocking starlight across 1 ard of the image. Then silence. The Rathari command center darkened as the ambient lights dimmed in silent acknowledgement of loss. No alarms, just raw data. Send another wave, Cirque ordered, but his voice had grown quieter. Ulath Van didn't speak. His eyes remained locked on the display. The technician to his left whispered, "What are we missing?" Then came the shift. It started with gravity sensors, pinged anomalies on the far edge of their surveillance net. Not heat, not EM, just gravitational distortion waves, layers, interference patterns too symmetrical to be natural. Shipmass muttered, the Rathari physicist on duty, Zoran Telk, blinking his crest lights in confusion or planetary no too localized. "It's rising. Nothing's on scope," said the young comm. "Exactly." Zoran Telk whispered, "That's the problem." Then one of the ships moved just a fraction, just enough to disrupt the gravity field in its immediate space. But it was enough more movement. Another 97 units activated their cores, at once low energy, resonance pulses, no weapons, no engine heat, just presence. Their position became reality. The gravitational web blinked, then stabilized, now undeniably warped by thousands of massive objects invisible to every eye. The prey hadn't noticed, but the trap had already closed aboard the Enshoreva. Sorak stood frozen. "Are those human?" Ulath Ven asked. Sorak didn't answer. The technician stared at the recalibrated projection and said, "There's no life signs." A beat passed. Ulath Ven's eyes narrowed. "The ones we fought, those weren't manned either. No signals," the technician said. "No AI signature, no neural flux, just mass structure." Zurentelk inhaled sharply, voice barely audible. "It's not a fleet," he said. Everyone turned to look. "It's a construct." He continued, eyes wide, one structure broken into form like armor, a skin of ships. Sorak stepped forward, voice colder than before. "Prepare to withdraw." Now the navigation officer entered coordinates, engines lit, warp vectors locked, and then nothing. The field didn't respond. No fold, no surge. The stars remained still. The universe didn't let them leave. The jump cores blinked amber and went inert. "Gravlock," the navigator said, stunned. "We're caught." How Ulath Ven snapped, "No anchors, no gravitational sources, they're making it." Zoran Telk whispered, "The field, it's artificial." Panic began to seep through the silence. No one shouted. No one ran, but you could feel it under the skin behind the eyes, as every officer's breath drew shallower. Then, on the edge of the field, more lights, not bright, not fast. Just slow pulses as ships revealed themselves one by one. Enormous pitch-black silhouettes shifting from invisibility to shape, forming the outer wall of a sphere. Each vessel larger than anything ever recorded. They didn't look built, they looked unearthed. Slow, intentional like tectonic plates turning, not designed for speed, designed for permanence on the Enshoreva. Sorex stared at the central projection. The crew waited for his word, but he didn't speak on one of the rear decks, a junior sensor officer whispered to himself, staring at the distortion map. "That's not a reading error," he said. He leaned forward, skin pale. "It's a shadow, and it's alive." Back to the war room, no celebration, no applause, just one line of data blinking across the screen. All units confirmed, synchronization complete. Lieutenant Saw turned to Archer. "Sir, fleet integrity at 100%. They've never seen us." Colonel Trent leaned in. "We're inside their gravity. Well..."
Total vector advantage, time to target on every node. Zero. Archer said nothing for a second, then Status Saw's hands moved swiftly. All nodes, green cloak-holding reactors, primed firing solutions distributed. Edro stepped forward, his face tense but steady. "They don't know what they're looking at." Sir Archer paused, silent. "Good," he said. The calm light pulsed. He raised a hand but didn't touch it around him. The board glowed outside. The Leviathan stirred one order away from turning the dark into fire. The map didn't blink. It watched the command light turn green inside the core bridge of the UNS Leviathan, flagship of the human war fleet hidden beyond Neptune. The war room came alive, the circular command deck buried beneath 2 meters of hardened plating and magnetic shielding was silent as the stars outside began to move. General Archer didn't need to give the order aloud, he simply lowered his hand. 10,000 warships answered from the void. The human fleet unfolded like a memory too large to stay buried. Not all at once, but in waves, formations unfolded like blades drawn from invisible sheaths, decloaking in synchronized patterns across every axis of the grid. Black hulls shimmered into view, edges lined with magneto-reactive armor and stealth-absorbent tessellation. Turret banks slid into locked positions. Reactors powered to full hull plates braced. Each ship showed no insignia. No flourish, just cold readiness. The Rathari saw them too late aboard the Ensure VA. Panic finally broke containment. New contacts, screamed the comms officer. Multiple vectors, mass signatures exceeding protocol class. How many Sorak snapped tendrils, rigid and curled beneath his robes, the technician stammered. "Thousands, sir, to 10,000 vessels. They're surrounding us." Zoran Telk's breath rasped through his throat. "Sax, this isn't a response fleet. It's an extinction grid across the bridge." Command voices rose layered and desperate. "They're deploying in perfect hemispheric entrapment. We can't break orbit. There's no breach vector. They're everywhere." Althan swam to the edge of his command tank, eyes wide and clouding over. "We were blind from the beginning." On the Leviathan, Colonel Trent stepped closer to the tactical display encirclement phase. Complete outer perimeter locked. They have nowhere left to vector. Lieutenant Saw turned Saturn grid is active. Archer's eyes didn't shift from the center hollow. "Engage suppression." He said far beneath the icy plane of Saturn's rings. A silent structure flickered to life. An ancient deep well transmitter co-engineered by human and Zenital scientists decades prior. Its signal wasn't visible. It wasn't loud. It was absolute. A pulse, soundless and unseen, rippled from the rings. Not an explosion, but a veto gravity. Itself said no, calibrated to anchor warp cores into false negative feedback. Every Rathari vessel that attempted to prime its jump engine found only static and system null. Back on the Inserva, chaos erupted. Fold drives, failing vectors won't lock. Engine response. Degraded Cirque watched as his fleet dissolved into fragmentation. No cohesion, no escape in front of him. Dozens of human dreadnoughts hovered in complete silence inside the war room. Eidos whispered, "Sir, they're frozen. Their entire command fleet is static." Archer nodded once. "Hold formation. No fire." Colonel Trent narrowed his eyes. "You want them to see it. I want them to remember it." Back in the Rathari Corps Command, the last attempts to coordinate retreat collapsed. Audio traffic, looped with error chain of command signals, fell into recursive dead zones. Automated systems seized. One of the officers screamed in a fractured dialect, throwing his data slate across the deck. Ulath Ven's voice cracked. We were supposed to crush them." Sorak did not move. He looked at the map. 10,000 warships formed in silence, aimed powered surrounding every Rathari vessel without so much as a flare. Then he turned. Transmit. He ordered full-band galactic open frequency. The comms officer, hands trembling, nodded a single message, left the Ensure VA broadcast in clean Eladari protocol. We request formal terms of surrender. Back on the Leviathan, silence lingered for 1 beat, then 2. Somewhere behind the main deck in the personnel corridors, a Marine leaned against the wall and let out a low breath. Sergeant Hal Brenner, 3rd-generation Lunar Force, looked to the man beside him, an old instructor from the last series theater. 1,000 years, Brenner muttered, and they finally remembered who we are. Rogers didn't answer right away. He just looked at the stars and said, "They remembered because we made them." Across the observation platforms of the fleet, operators paused. Pilots held formation, engineers froze in place, and among them, scattered across ships and control towers, the Zenithal watched. One Errol stood beside a human comms officer aboard the UNS Kais. His form no longer flickered between human and native. He stood as he was tall, narrow, semi-translucent, bearing the scars of his own sacrifice. He closed his eyes as the Rathari signal came through, not in fire, not in triumph, but in memory aboard the Leviathan. Archer stepped forward. The war room dimmed, the map held steady. The circle was closed. Archer didn't speak. He simply turned away, and the galaxy held its breath, as if it had just remembered what humans were and what they could become when left in the dark. Too long, the transmission began without warning across the known galaxy on civilian hubs, military platforms, trade routes, and border colonies. Screens flickered once, then stabilized into a single image. General Archer standing alone in full uniform, the seal of Earth behind him. No flags, no anthem, no ambient tone, just silence. His eyes were fixed on the lens, unflinching. You spied on our moves, you forgot we invented them, no preamble, no escalation. He didn't blink. The feed expanded into a split display on the left. The wreckage of Rathari vessels floated in silent procession, dragged through escort corridors by human patrol ships, their weapons deactivated, their engines cold. They offered no resistance. They were not prisoners. Just remnants on the right orbital scaffolds flickered to life. Human and Zenodel engineers worked side by side atop the shattered frame of relay platform. 3 Delta above Mars. Sparks flew from Torch's cable lines. Reconnected stabilizers were realigned by 4-limbed Zenodel technicians, whose forms no longer hid beneath human guise. They stood uncovered, unmasked, present in a communications hub on Luna Prime. Civilians gathered around a transparent screen as 2 figures came into view. Major Caesar Brenner of the UN's, Mellon and Errol, the same Zenodel who had once infiltrated Earth under the name Jacob. They stood above the fractured foundation of the Leonov station. The wreckage fused to the dusted red horizon behind them. Neither spoke. Brenner extended a hand. Errol accepted it. No salute, no translation, no need. One war ended, another kind began. The screen held there, fingers clasped firm, quiet, until the visual faded to black back on the central feed. Archer hadn't moved. He continued, voice low, steady. We've been called many things. Primitive, unstable, obsolete myths, a threat. He glanced away for only half a second, then locked eyes with the lens again, and we listened for 1,000 years. We listened now. The feed changed again. Footage from across the human sectors rolled slowly, interior shots of recovered control rooms, soldiers lifting wounded civilians from collapsed corridors, Zenithal and human medics working side by side. One scene showed a group of children being led through the remains of a bunker in the Pacific Ridge, flanked by a tall, armored human officer and a Zenodel whose eyes shimmered gold under the emergency lights. The children weren't afraid. They looked up at, both with the same expression. Safety. Archer's voice returned over the imagery. We didn't forget who we were. We chose silence, not surrender, patience, not absence. Now the screen widened to show the Rathari fleet drifting through Saturn's corridor, scattered and inert. Their ships now marked not with battle damage but with escort tags coded, logged, processed, orderly. And then came the final sequence, a camera drone operated from within. The Leviathan hovered along the length of the human fleet, slowly passing beneath dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of holes. Each ship held position without drift. No formation broke. No pilot turned. This wasn't for display. This was a declaration. The drone passed through the outer perimeter and into the central formation until it reached the war room itself. Archer stepped forward one final time. "This is your history lesson," he said. "Next time, don't rewrite it. Read it better." The final cut came without transition. Archer's image vanished in its place. A message in clean galactic standard burned into every screen. "If you want something done, do it yourself." The feed ended. Silence reclaimed the stars. Not the silence of absence, the silence of recalibration on Varnari Prime. The insectoid archivists filed a new entry under first-class historical events on Solaris 8. The Sulvar delegates canceled their next summit and ordered a full review of diplomatic assumptions regarding Earth on Altari 3. The bones-kinned dignitaries issued a rare broadcast we misjudged correction, noted even on the distant world of Valansar, where the Skriari held no respect for organic tactics. One elder caste member simply stared at the static feed and said, "They built that in the dark." Back on Earth, beneath the reinforced sky of New Geneva, two children, one human one, ran across a restored training field near the old Citadel ruins. The Zenadel child stumbled, laughed, and got up again. No one stopped them, and no one watched them with suspicion. At the edge of that field, an old technician knelt near an open panel on the inside. Next to the old Earth Defense logo was a new symbol etched into the alloy by hand, a fractured eye, a Zenadel mark, but no longer alone, and no longer hidden. It was once a symbol of surveillance, now a signature. Hey there, space human. I'm really. Please like and subscribe if you have liked it.